Good morning and welcome to Exceptional Effort Business Sunday. I'm here with Pete Keogh, Ingrid Colquitt, and Julian is an apology this week. He's having a bit of a travel, and I'm Damien Andrews. Today we're talking about change and how we are adapting from this COVID environment. How seriously are we taking the changes that we need to take? It seems like we've got an interesting time, an unprecedented time, where, if I could say that correctly, unprecedented time in relation to we've had this lockdown period where we've had to adjust to that, and now as the environment is freeing up, how do we take the changes that we need to put in place? What are you seeing from your perspective?
So I'll share a little story. Yesterday had a couple of observers that I could make into two different business sectors. The restaurant hospitality area. We went out for dinner. The restaurant, which is quite a large Chinese restaurant, had completely socially spaced their tables. Had gone to enormous effort to make sure that they were in a good position to open. They had hand sanitizers available scattered through the restaurant as we moved around. There were bins with paper towels and all things that gave you and people that have got this, they've thought about it, and so it was an entirely comfortable experience. On the other hand, I went into a retail outlet, which was a smallish but quite cluttered. It's quite a popular little place, and they had not socially distanced their flooring, even though they could have done so. They weren't policing numbers at all. And I found myself recoiling slightly at the till from some other patrons who were, not socially distancing from me. And it made me ask the question, if we are actually supposed to be looking after each other, are people just ignoring those thoughts of protecting others, protecting themselves and protecting others, the herd mentality, or out of selfishness, or out of stupidity, or just lack of thought, or just over eagerness to re-experience things that have been withheld from them for a while. So it just made me think about how people are transitioning, how people are finding that not only in a business setting, in an office, in a boardroom, in a meeting room, what impact it has on them, and how well we are really doing as individuals. Because I always considered myself very, very hardy, and yet here I was, recoiling from a circumstance. So just really interesting feelings for myself yesterday, and wanted to see how other people were doing and whether they were actually thinking any more about protecting others genuinely when they go out, and in what circumstances, what triggers are there to do that.
Those Ingrid, I think those triggers are set from an individual place, governed by outside sources like World Health Organization, all the way down to your local councils, etc., and state governments. And I think that a lot of people see it as a role play. So they go out into the world, shopping, work, whatever, and okay, my mindset's got to be different here because we've got to keep that distance, that 1.5. Even how we cough, handle our hygiene, etc. And then there's that sense of repetition, and over a few days becomes the norm. But I think there's a lot of people that when those restrictions and those sort of ropes get released a little bit, then hang on, now I've got to change my mindset, my role play. And I think people in general are having issues with that just from observation. Myself, the self-discipline of going to a business or going to shopping or whatever, that yeah, I do maintain that, you know, I want to keep my 1.5. But just I think as this snowballs and is more relaxed situations, people are just drop the ball a little mindset, doing that mindfulness. I think. What do you think, Damien?
Yeah, well, that comes back to I was just making notes there about, you know, how much do we think about others and what's important for them? Because from that perspective, I look at as we've moved and evolved over the years. I mean, the world that we existed in was mostly a zero-sum world. So for you to gain advantage or to improve your lot, someone else had to lose. And that's where a lot of wars were fought for that reason. Countries and villages would raid another village, obtain those resources, be they materials, people, whatever, and as a result, they improved. Whereas today's society, because innovation is so fast, we exist in a positive sum world, which means that, you know, when you look after someone else, you actually improve your own lot. An example with the coronavirus, if, for example, I mean, when they're trying to find a cure, there's only so many medical centers in the world that exist today that can deal with that. Now, imagine had we spent the time to improve all the economies of the world, all the countries had equal technology, then all of those countries would have those medical facilities, and therefore you'd have so many more people working on the problem, and the problem would be solved quicker. So it'd be in your interest to do that. And this is where, from that perspective, I believe we're moving towards that change. I'm not sure if we're at the tipping point yet, but I do wonder, you know, when we look at things, how much we look at, well, how much is this just, am I doing this for myself? And in doing so, might be cutting off my own nose to spite my face, because I'm just thinking about myself rather than thinking about the broader impact on the world.
I think it's a reflection a little bit, and I'd like to say that we're getting closer to the tipping point. But I think we're almost sort of in between the two, and we could get trapped in between the two as society, never quite making it, never quite flicking it over, because there's some innate, you know, very native, very core, survival, selfish, sort of self-interested modes that we've gone through as human beings. They're all still very commercially driven. They're all still very money oriented. And I question, while we have that as one of our primary drivers, whether we'll actually flip over to the point where the world is actually global humanity, global society, zero poverty. There's certainly enough in the world to go around in terms of wealth, but we don't do it. You know, we don't flip it over. So what are the barriers there? And there's some very selfish or self-interested human behaviours that I think are holding us back from that positive, from actually gaining full momentum.
Because I find it interesting that when people talk about, you know, achieving goals and how it's hard and a struggle, and I noticed that from a lot of that perspective, when I watch the behaviours of how people are doing, especially people that are really adamant about how hard it is, a lot of the times they're looking after themselves rather than other people. And I've found from my own experience, there's times where it hasn't, in that moment, it hasn't been in my interest to do, quote unquote, the right thing. But I've recognised that this situation is right, and I've taken it on the chin. With a client at the moment, we're doing some work replacing some panels on a structure, and I've just taken that. Not only did I take that on board for the client, but I also upped the ante a bit, where we changed the material, so it was a higher quality material. We changed the we delivered above and beyond what was originally expected.
Yeah.
And I found, that's an example of where that's happened recently, but I've found I've done that a lot in how I've operated. There was a 22-story high-rise that I was managing, and there's a few things that I didn't have to do. They weren't in my scope or my client's scope to do, but I took that on board and said, look, I accept that, we'll do that. And as a result of that, what I got back was actually tenfold in value, like monetary terms. What I put across was minor in comparison. It was a $110 million contract. What I put across was actually minor in comparison to that contract, but I gave it up. I actually literally got 10 times that value back for no work. Literally did no work. Not in one lump sum, but in a number of areas. The client had said, okay, no, I'll give you that, and literally didn't do any work. And so that's where I really find, if you put that out there, it makes it so much easier, especially in a business perspective. The law of reciprocity, I can't speak this morning. The law of reciprocity exists. But as human beings, at a deep subconscious level, if someone gives to us, we are driven to actually give back. A lot of people do fight that, but we are driven to give back. And I find more often than not, if you operate from that perspective, it makes your life easier globally as you move forward.
Absolutely.
I mean, that choice that you made to do something that was outside your scope. I ask you this from a teaching point of view. Was that a forced thought action, or was that a natural forced thought action? So did you go, okay, I want to go outside because of these reasons, or did you just do it naturally? I think the progression that Ingrid was talking about before is that we hope that tipping point that we do things naturally and just because, without thought, because it's our character, which comes from family and education. So I'm just wondering your motives behind that working outside your scope. Do you, over a period of time, just make it a natural thing? I know, because at the start we always, unless you're naturally formed that way as character and human, but to actually go outside your realms, we have to start forcing. It's like change a habit. So I'm just interested on where your thought process was.
I'd say from a combination of two. I believe, from memory, that's how my parents brought me up, particularly my mum, and she had a quote saying, don't do things because you feel like you have to do, or don't do things because you expect something in return, do it because you want to. And from that perspective, I think I've always had that wanting to care for other people is something that I believe I've been brought up with. But same token, in a business perspective, I haven't always operated that way. And in that particular circumstance, it was coming at it from a bigger picture perspective. It was also a humbling perspective as well, because my client had, before I got there, my client had messed up a lot. So there were things that they just completely screwed up and done wrong, and so I took that on board as an offer to move it forward. So this is the interesting scenario with that. My client has completely screwed things up big time, and we're talking to the tune of several $1 million that they've made mistakes. So their client was extremely, in a government department, was extremely pissed off with the whole environment. When I've got there, the relationship had seemed really, well, not seemed, it was extremely tense, not a lot of trust. And so I've looked at that from that perspective, and maybe driven because I have that ability from being taught that way as a child, but I took that on board and said, well, we've screwed up. I'm not going to sit there and pretend we haven't. I'm not going to say, and try and fight my position, because they're just going to fight back. We're already fighting. So I'm going to relieve the tension and say, hey, we screwed up. Here's my way of trying to fix this. And in doing that, what I did was ended up getting more back. So, which is the irony of that. We'd screwed up. And if I had continued to fight it, I would imagine they would have continued to fight. But I just took it on board and said, sorry, we made a mistake. Here's my attempt to fix it. And then I said, I believe that law of reciprocity exists. They gave back so much more. Sorry, Ingrid, you're going to say?
So it's kind of the commercial form of paying it forward. But I'm wondering, how we are multiple different types of business communities in Australia. I think most sectors are actually genuinely quite generous. I think that most sectors have gone up to quite extraordinary lengths to look after their own, even if they've had to let people go. But will that be sustained? That's a really interesting thing when we start to look at considerations of, do we keep flexible work-life patterns moving forward? Do we just accept them? Do we just fall back to many customer or client types? And I work with federal government, so we've been in the ICT sector. We've been working and delivering remotely into federal government in the ICT space for decades, a couple of decades nearly. But for those sectors that are more conservative and less willing to try different modes of work, or to maintain those modes of work into the future, even though there may be at an individual level sufficient evidence to prove that you've delivered during the time. So it's going to be really interesting to see that the HR space, the legal and workplace relations space as we resurface, and the willingness to keep those discussions open and modes open to people.
I just want to add to that the kindness of people, I think, are getting that, then how much of the other side of people are going to sort of take that and run with it. There's a word or two words called human nature, and it's always going to be there. But I think being a 50-year-old male that has lived in different scenarios in the world, as we all have, I believe that generally looking out with the people that I associate with in businesses and the schools I work with, I'm seeing more kindness and more schedules just because. But you're right, we can't always keep that way, because we've always got to watch what's around us, and there's a thing called awareness. But now my heart's a little bit fuller of, I'm more accepting that there are more kind people out there.
I'm completely with you. In my heart, I don't travel through the world looking for bad in people. I don't travel through the world, inciting or being controversial. It's just an interesting, as an analyst, you can hear my brain kind of throw questions at the universe at the moment and go, how resilient will we be? Will it stick? Will people who perhaps weren't as thoughtful before COVID and have become more thoughtful, will that stick? Or will the behaviours regress? So it's more a curiosity for me. You know, I'm not prejudging, I'm not pre-canning the outcome. I'm just seeing the minefield or the map, or you know, the golden, you know, the yellow brick road. Whichever way you want to look at it, there's heaps of new opportunities out there, and I'd like to think people who have stepped up and continue to step up, keep leading that behaviour, and don't give up.
As Damien says, it's a choice, isn't it? All comes down to choice.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think today too, one thing that I really love about living in our world is the fact that we have the internet and information is readily available. It's really hard today, and there's some, I'm not going to mention names, but I'm sure there's one that comes to mind. It's really hard today to bullshit and not get caught. So, you know, from that perspective, and this is where I think not only from that side of things where, because the information is so readily available, you can see, it transmits so far. I mean, I've been just recently watching some documentaries on World War II and the propaganda that was put forward there. That propaganda was able to sit because it was never challenged. There was no opportunity to challenge it. Because information wasn't as readily available. But today, you look at something like that, there's no way that could happen because it would be caught really quickly. People go, hang on a minute, that's not right. And I think from that perspective, even from a business perspective, this is where I find it really important. I look at, you know, for example, there's a situation a legal matter that I'm dealing with at the moment. And the lawyer on the other side, some of that stuff that he's put forward is completely and utter bullshit. But on top of that, you know, when you look at that reputation will spread very. Your reputation does precede you, and in the internet social media age, your reputation precedes you on a global scale almost instantly. So it's so important today to actually do the right thing first, because if you don't, it's much more detrimental to you. And I take a little bit of and this is a little bit, this is where people, you know, when you generally talk about giving, people think it's, you know, you're losing something. And I actually have a different philosophy on giving. To me, I believe giving is actually a selfish act, and in its true sense. Because if you're giving truly, if you're giving because you're expecting something back, it doesn't work. But if you're truly giving, I feel that, from my experience anyway, I've found that I end up getting so much more back. Maybe not directly, but it comes in from so many. When I've given in the perspective of helping a client, that client will refer me to other clients, and my job is so much easier because of that. So as a result of me genuinely giving, I've actually received so much more, and that's where I approach it as I think it's a selfish act. I think if you really genuinely help other people, it actually benefits you more.
Well, as to Eastern philosophy and stuff on everyone, the gift is in the giving, and to me, it's gratitude, and to me, it's also breathing. We breathe in to breathe out, and when we give, we receive. And if we give badly, we in terms and different ways, we get badly. That can be from relationships to work to your interests or whatever it is. But yeah, I think I'm teaching a lot at the moment in schools with self-development programs on gratitude. I get children to pick someone who they value, someone who they look up to, that one must be alive, two, they must know, and three, they must value. And they've got to make, when I'm teaching them, to next time I see them, they're going to make a moment with that person and actually tell them why they look up to them. And for a lot of people, it's difficult, especially 15, 16-year-old kids. And we can flip that to the workplace as well, regardless of where you are on the hierarchy of structure. And then in 2 or 3 weeks' time, when I go back to that school, I get big buffet boys that actually tell me their story about who they told it to, what happened. And sometimes it's dad or uncle or grandpa or mum, and there's tears, and sometimes they're just because they're not used to it, that dial, that conversation. So yeah, and it's that first little step, and I'm always a big believer in 1%ers. You do it 100 times, you get 100%. So it's a bit of the karma bust this morning, isn't it?
It is.
But I found it.
Giving is a practice. I don't believe it's selfish unless you go out and actually intend to gain back from it.
Mm.
I don't believe it's quite a selfish act. I hear where you're going with it.
Yeah, that's just my take on it. But yeah, I agree. It's not selfish in the sense that you're genuinely, as long as you're genuinely giving. But I think you just get more back.
Correct.
Yeah, the word selfish is probably more shock value than.
And without expectation of something in return, and in so many different in life as I was, particularly travelling long distance for work. You're in this, tin can in the air and sitting next to people that you don't know. And at the end of the flight, you can become quite firm friends. It's some kind of lens gets focused in that. Perhaps your normal behaviours or normal interactions or inclinations not to speak out as much or to be more shy. So that analogy kind of is like us flying through the COVID tin can and seeing what's at the other side in a year's time or 2 years' time or 5 years' time.
Before we probably were going to change a little bit to topics, etc. The giving back from a martial arts instructor's point of view, if I say that I've received 100% from my instructor and 100% of the information is in here, and I only give my students 80%, and they think it's 100%, and then I teach them that value, then they're only, when they get in the organisation from a business point of view or from a martial arts point of view, that then they only pass on what they know of 80%, which becomes 60%, all start to dilute down. And I think teaching the right values at the start, whether it be a new employee, to let them know and be open and honest, that's a gift in itself. And then when you may not be there, got to go next 20%, so I'm going to use that now and help the day get through, help a client out or whatever. So it's important. The giving is a must.
It's also a kind of generosity of spirit. And both of those have to come together with an intention to have a better outcome.
And to draw it back, I think to drawing from a bit of Eastern philosophy, Sun Tzu's Art of War as well, it's about are you fighting the battle or are you fighting the war? Because a lot of the times in a situation you might look out and be looking after yourself, but when you look at the bigger picture, you might be losing the war. And that's where I find, from that perspective of when people struggle to do things, and friends of mine that are really successful, I find when I talk to them, their success is not a struggle. They don't work hard. I mean, they put in effort, and it's not but it's not a struggle for them to succeed because they've built this reputation. It's amazing how many handshake deals are done on a word with people that they trust each other. Now, when you have that relationship of trust and you can have that handshake deal, it makes your life so much easier to operate because you're not having to worry about, are they going to follow through? Are they going to do this? Do I need to measure that? And I can tell you from, part of my job has been having those fights when things don't go right. And that is energy sapping to an organization. it takes so much effort to have the fight to get over that situation. And this is where, from that perspective, if you can have that relationship where people trust you and you trust them, it becomes so much easier. And think about it from, we probably all had a relationship at some point in our life where it wasn't going so well, and you didn't, you're constantly arguing or fighting, and how stressful is that? Whereas if you have a very calm and relaxed relationship of trust, all of a sudden your life becomes easier. And I really believe that when you focus on that side of things, your life does become easy. You're achieving your goals, whether they're personal or business, becomes a lot easier when you approach it from that perspective of quote unquote doing the right thing.
That's where the old saying of you catch bees with honey. I just want to tell everyone today that's wrong. Because if you were smarter, you'd use, and then you get the bees to come to the flowers and go, I make the honey. So yeah, I just wanted to add that one.
It's a great philosophy. You catch bees with flowers. I love that. So, which is true. A lot of
bees with flowers.
Exactly. Yeah, but it is so true, and it makes life easier when you approach it from that perspective. It really does. So from a business and personal perspective, approaching yourself that way, but also to being mindful. This is a big one. Be mindful of people. Some people don't operate that way, and steer clear of them. Really, and politely just move away, because if you involve yourself with people that don't operate from that perspective, it's going to be trouble. And I've personally had that experience on both a personal and a business level, where I've willingly thought, I will try and work through this and try and, I could gut feel. Basically, I felt something was wrong. And I've gone, okay, now I'll move forward. And then even when there was some evidence that was wrong, I continued from the perspective of going, well, I hope these people will change, which is probably where you're getting to, Ingrid, initially, is are people going to change? And I think, some people will, some people won't. But, from your perspective as an operator within business, you do need to be mindful of operating with people that are going to be in your best interest.
And look, there are personality types, characters that are just a bit like sharks, really cruising around, waiting to have a feast when they want one, and it's usually those sorts of people don't even respect kindness. They don't have they don't value the same things. Fundamentally, they don't value the same things. And unfortunately, those lessons in life are generally hard ones. And we've all had them, and we would never wish them from anybody. So I'm just hoping that as we move forward, not only as a country, but as a globe of citizens, that we do have a majority of people that choose to care, choose to be kind, choose to care enough about the herd to protect and inform those who obviously aren't displaying those traits, educate and advocate for a higher outcome.
I think, Ingrid, that there is a change, and I'll cite one example that the world is moving in that direction. There's a lady called Susan Butcher. I don't know if you know of her or not. She raced sled dogs. And there's a race in Canada or Greenland, I'm not sure exactly where it is. It's the longest race. It's about 1,700 either kilometres or miles. Obviously, that's a big difference depending on where. It's a long race. What's that?
Alaska.
Yeah, it's somewhere up north, but it's the most grueling sled race. Now, she had this philosophy that they would perform, because basically it was a big macho men thing, and they would beat the dogs to get the performance out of them, stuff like that. She came in with the approach that if they actually trained the dogs like they trained athletes, treated them with kindness, that kind of thing, and And they laughed at her. They said, go away. Anyway, she went away with her philosophy. She came back. She not only won it, she won the race, she won it the following year, and then she won it a third time. And then as a result of that, they had to change because she was performing so much better. And I've also noticed, like, for example, in the business perspective, there's changes in philosophy of how, for example, negotiation is done. A lot of negotiations based on some Harvard models and Ackerman models of negotiation, where it's all about haggling and beating the other person down, where there are some new philosophies that are now out there and they're being used where it's more about collaboration. And in the techniques that you use and then, they just destroy the Ackerman model. They get better results because they approach from a collaborative perspective and they tap into that human psyche of the reciprocity, unconscious, and coming back to that example with the client, where as soon as I said, hey, I'll take that on board, all of a sudden it triggers these unconscious things where a person to then fight against you is fighting against their own nature, because deep inside we have that. And I find that that's where I think we are moving towards that, because there's a lot more of that out there.
It's more of a we and us mentality than you and I. And humans, we're packed. We, it takes a bit like being people, although more time on your own. But collab. I'm not alone here, and it opens up natural feelings within people, emotional side, which is comforting.
I really challenge business owners in any business role at this time is to be really mindful about your intentions in your future, the intentions for the future you are trying to create in your business sector, the intentions for your business within the construct of community, and for your employees.
All right, we are running out of time. Do you want to give us one key takeaway, and then we'll wrap today up?
Have the floor.
Okay. There's so many things that we jumped over. I want to put my mind back to the natural feeling of gratitude or giving unconsciously, rather than forced. To change that habit, if you're not that sort of person, whether it be in a business space or relationship, etc., is to be mindful of it for 21 days. In 21 days, if you're mindful of that, you can change your habit, moving it from a conscious to a subconscious. But yeah, to over to, because as this get fuller and fuller, there's going to be pressure and stuff. So to have that in being a kind person and giving.
Fabulous. And people say that mindfulness is, hard work when they start it. That takes a lot of energy and a lot of thought. It takes commitment, and it's that same level of commitment that's going to be required to maintain that generosity of spirit, of kindness, and of thinking about protecting others as well as yourself moving forward, whether it's in business or in your family or in the community.
I'd add to that, Ingrid, that it takes, you say taking energy and effort to do that. I would say it takes energy and effort when you fight against it. If you paddle with the current, it's easy. As soon as you let go and say, yeah, I can do this, it just becomes easy. Anyway, that's our show today, Exceptional Effort Business Sunday. Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you next week.